My mother sued me for 20% of my tech company because her abuse motivated me to succeed. So, I exposed her fraudulent shell company to her biggest investor. I am Mark. I'm 34 years old, and at what was supposed to be a picture-perfect Thanksgiving family dinner, I sat back and watched my entire family completely implode because of the money I had quietly earned. But before I get into the federal wire fraud, the cutthroat corporate lawyers, the agonizing betrayal, and the exact moment I finally excised them from my life for good, you need to understand the suffocating environment I survived. The air inside my parents' sprawling Seattle home was thick, heavy with the overpowering scent of roasted turkey, buttery mashed potatoes, and the sharp, artificial tang of pine-scented candles my mother insisted on burning in every corner of the house. To anyone else, it might have smelled like a warm, welcoming family holiday. To me, it was completely suffocating. It always was. Stepping through their heavy oak front door never felt like coming home, it felt like stepping onto a meticulously arranged stage set. And in this grand, theatrical production of our family life, I wasn't the star. I wasn't even a supporting actor. I was merely part of the scenery, expected to remain silent, blend into the background, and not pull focus from the main event. My younger brother, Derek. Derek was the golden child. It wasn't a whispered secret, it was the foundational constitution of our family unit. Looking effortlessly sharp in a tailored cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my first 3 cars combined, he was currently holding court at the head of the dining room table. A glass of incredibly expensive red wine, a gift he had ostentatiously presented to my father upon arrival, swirled elegantly in his hand. He was passionately painting a grand, sweeping vision of his brand new real estate venture, Vanguard Estates. He threw around bloated corporate buzzwords like synergy, market disruption, and paradigm shifts, with reckless abandon. "It's an absolute sure thing," Derek announced, his voice booming with a hollow confidence he hadn't actually earned, but had simply been handed his entire life. "We're conservatively projecting 7-figure profits in the first fiscal year alone. The sky is the absolute limit, and we are just getting started." My mother, Susan, gazed across the table at him, her face a frozen mask of pure, unadulterated adoration. It was a look of profound pride that I had seen 1,000 times over the decades, but one that had never, not once, been directed at me. "Oh, that's my boy," she cooed, reaching over to gently pat his forearm as if he had just single-handedly cured a terrible disease. "Always thinking big. You have such a brilliant, solid plan." Then, as if remembering I was occupying a chair at her table, she slowly turned her head. Her gaze fell on me, and the radiant warmth in her eyes instantly vanished. It was replaced by a familiar, icy evaluation. Her warm smile thinned out into a perfectly straight, disapproving line. "And Mark," she said, her tone dripping with a sweet, poisonous condescension that was her absolute specialty, "how's your little computer thing going? Are you still just messing around with all that messy code in your dark little apartment?" The entire dining table fell dead silent. Every single relative, every nosy cousin, and every family friend who had been eagerly nodding along to Derek's grandiose speech now turned their heads to look at me. This was her signature move, the public diminishment. For years, I had perfected the quiet art of deflecting, of mumbling something vaguely polite, staring at my plate, and quickly changing the subject to avoid conflict. But not this year. A solid decade of silent, grueling work, of agonizing sacrifice, of being intentionally made to feel infinitesimally small, had built up a massive pressure inside my chest that was finally about to blow. I placed my silver fork down on my porcelain plate, slowly, deliberately. The small metallic clink times seemed to echo like a gunshot in the sudden, tense quiet of the room. I met her icy gaze and held it, absolutely refusing to be the first one to look away. "It's going incredibly well, Mom," I said, my voice dangerously calm, steady, and even. "The little computer thing is a highly specialized enterprise software company. My time software company. And it was just officially valued by a top-tier venture capital firm in Silicon Valley at $35 million. Silence. Absolute, deafening, suffocating silence. You could have heard a single snowflake land on the hardwood floor. Derek's smug, punchable smile froze on his face, then completely shattered into a million pieces. His expression rapidly cycled through a Rolodex of intense emotions, utter confusion, profound disbelief, and finally, a deep, blotchy, ugly shade of red. "What?" Derek sputtered, his voice cracking. He slammed his wine glass down onto the table with a heavy thud, sloshing dark red liquid onto my mother's pristine white tablecloth. "You? 35 million? That's a pathetic lie." He tried to force out a laugh, but it came out as a short, strangled, panicked bark. "You're a liar, Mark. You've never done anything important in your entire miserable life." "Derek, honey, please calm down," my mother frantically whispered, but her eyes were wide with shock, darting erratically between me and Derek as the gears furiously turned in her head. "No," he shouted, shoving his heavy wooden chair back so violently that it screeched terribly against the floorboards. He stood up, his whole body trembling with a rage that was terrifyingly childish for a grown man. He's making this garbage up just to make me look bad. He's always been obsessed and jealous of me. Mark, stop this ridiculous, attention-seeking nonsense this very instant. My mother screeched, her voice rising to a shrill, hysterical pitch as she rushed over to Derek's side to comfort him. You're deliberately upsetting your brother on his big night. And my father, Thomas? He just sat there at the opposite end of the table, entirely motionless. His face was a blank, unreadable, cowardly mask. His eyes remained fixed on his half-eaten turkey as if the floral pattern on the fine china held the mystical answers to the universe. He didn't say a single word. He didn't defend me. He didn't even flinch. The dining room instantly erupted into total chaos, with shouting, gasps, and wild accusations flying across the once festive table. But in that exact moment, as I sat back and watched the family I had spent a lifetime desperately trying to please completely fall apart at the seams, I felt a strange, cold, beautiful calm wash over my entire body. This wasn't the end of the story. This was just the initial explosion that exposed a deep, toxic rot that had been festering in our family for decades. To truly understand how we arrived at this thermonuclear Thanksgiving dinner, you have to go back in time. You have to understand the two completely different, isolated worlds my brother and I grew up in while living under the exact same roof. Growing up in our house was a brutal, daily masterclass in inequality. It felt exactly like living inside a split-screen movie. On one side of the screen, you had Derek's life, playing out in vibrant, highly saturated colors accompanied by a triumphant orchestral soundtrack. On the other side, you had my life, filmed in gritty, grainy black and white with nothing but the depressing sound of crickets. We had the exact same parents and the exact same home address, but we were treated like citizens of two entirely different countries, one of which was a beloved, wealthy homeland, and the other a barren, forgotten penal colony. Derek was charming, conventionally athletic, and possessed my mother's striking looks, a fact she made sure to point out loudly at every possible social gathering. In their eyes, he was biologically incapable of doing wrong. If he shattered a living room window while recklessly playing baseball in the house, my dad would just chuckle warmly and say, "That's my boy." What an absolute cannon of an arm. If I accidentally left a single schoolbook on the edge of the coffee table, my mother would sigh dramatically, rub her temples, and sneer, "Mark, why do I constantly have to clean up your messes? Your brother never leaves a trail of garbage behind him." The differences weren't just in daily discipline, they were deeply woven into the financial fabric of our entire family. Take our 16th birthdays, for example. On the crisp morning of Derek's 16th birthday, I was rudely awakened by the blaring sound of a car horn. I rubbed my eyes, looked out my bedroom window, and saw a brand new, customized, jet black Jeep Wrangler sitting proudly in our driveway. A giant, ridiculous, oversized red bow was stuck to the hood. My parents flanked the expensive vehicle, beaming with overwhelming pride as Derek ran outside in his pajamas, screaming with pure joy. He hadn't worked a single day in his entire life. He hadn't saved a single dime. The $40,000 vehicle was simply bestowed upon him, a divine right of the favored, golden son. My 16th birthday, which had occurred 2 years prior, had been a significantly quieter, more depressing affair. My dad had awkwardly handed me a generic greeting card from the grocery store with a crisp $50 bill tucked inside. "Happy birthday, Mark," he had muttered, not making eye contact. Learning financial responsibility is the greatest gift a man can ever have. I spent that entire miserable summer flipping greasy, frozen burger patties at a local, run-down diner, the nauseating smell of fried onions permanently clinging to my hair and clothes. I saved every single dollar, denying myself movies and hangouts, until I finally had enough cash to buy a 1-2-year-old, beat-up Honda Civic with a massive dent in the passenger door and a persistent, unidentifiable smell of wet dog in the upholstery. When I proudly parked it in the driveway for the very first time, my mother barely glanced out the kitchen window and coldly remarked, "Well, I certainly hope that piece of junk is reliable. We are absolutely not driving all over the city to bail you out when it inevitably breaks down." There was zero praise for my grueling hard work, only a preemptive warning about the potential inconvenience my existence might cause them. The ultimate disparity, the one that truly set the unalterable course for our adult lives, was our education. Derek was an aggressively below-average student. He barely scraped by on his natural charm, certainly not his intellect. Yet, my parents stubbornly insisted he attend the most elite, outrageously expensive private high school in the entire city. The exorbitant tuition was a constant, crushing source of stress in the house. I would frequently overhear them having hushed, incredibly anxious conversations in the kitchen late at night about draining their retirement savings, about taking out second mortgages, and about putting off crucial repairs on the house just to afford his tuition. But for Derek, absolutely no expense was too great. He was deemed a vital investment in the future. Meanwhile, I was a straight-A student. I genuinely loved to learn, hungrily devouring advanced books on complex mathematics and computer science, but when it came time for me to transition to high school, a private education was never once mentioned. It wasn't even on the table as a remote possibility. The underfunded, overcrowded public school down the street was deemed perfectly fine for my limited needs. The underlying message was crystal clear: Derek's future was worth immense financial struggle and sacrifice. Mine was not. He was a long-term, high-yield investment. I was a fixed, annoying expense that needed to be aggressively minimized. My mother's absolute favorite phrase, the one she deployed with surgical, devastating precision to cut me down to size whenever I felt proud of something, was always, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" It was a rhetorical question, obviously. It was just a disguised statement of fact: you are not enough. But honestly, it wasn't just my mother's venomous words that shaped my worldview, it was my father's suffocating silence. His silence was a living, breathing entity in our home, a heavy, suffocating blanket that smothered any lingering hope of fairness or justice. He was there physically, occupying space in the living room recliner, but emotionally, he was a ghost haunting his own family. He clearly saw the blatant, unapologetic favoritism. He saw me paying for my own car insurance and school supplies with my minimum wage job while they happily funded Derek's extravagant weekend ski trips. He saw my mother praise Derek for simply breathing while she brutally criticized every minor choice I ever made. And he did absolutely nothing. His refusal to intervene wasn't keeping the peace. It was a full, enthusiastic endorsement of the status quo. He was a silent, complicit partner in my mother's relentless campaign of emotional neglect. That silence taught me a valuable, painful lesson: sometimes, the people who say nothing are the most dangerous and complicit of all. When it came time for college, the family's deeply ingrained double standard officially became formal financial policy. Derek, who had lazily coasted through his ridiculously expensive private high school with a solid C- average, somehow managed to get accepted into a decent, wildly expensive private university 2 states away. My parents were absolutely ecstatic. They threw him a massive, catered going-away party, inviting all their wealthy friends to loudly celebrate the successful launch of their golden child into the adult world. They bought him a whole new designer wardrobe, a top-of-the-line MacBook Pro, and set him up with a generous, recurring monthly allowance that was significantly more than what I earned in a month of full-time, back-breaking work. For me, the conversation about college was starkly different. It took place in the kitchen under the harsh, flickering fluorescent lights. My mother slapped some financial aid papers onto the table. "Now, Mark," she began, using a tone that falsely suggested she was being incredibly logical and reasonable. "We've helped as much as we humanly can, with Derek's immense tuition. Our savings are incredibly tight right now." My father just stood by the coffee maker, sipping his dark roast, a silent, pathetic bystander to my fate. It was made abundantly clear that the entire financial burden for my higher education rested squarely on my shoulders. There was absolutely no discussion of the joint college fund they had supposedly started for both of us when we were toddlers. It had been entirely, selfishly consumed by Derek. So, I did what I had always done my entire life: I figured it out myself. I studied relentlessly and earned a partial academic scholarship to a state university in Seattle. It had a genuinely fantastic computer science program, but in my mother's elitist eyes, it was just a cheap public school. It severely lacked the brand name, country club prestige she so desperately craved for her sons, or at least, for her favorite one. Those 4 college years were a relentless, agonizing grind. My daily life was a carefully orchestrated chaos of advanced coding lectures, grueling late-night study sessions in the library basement, and incredibly long shifts at a busy coffee shop near campus where I worked as a barista. The permanent smell of burnt espresso and spoiled steamed milk became the scent of my survival. I lived in a tiny, cramped, depressing apartment with 3 other messy guys. Our living room was a chaotic maze of stained secondhand furniture and towering stacks of textbooks. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. It was the very first time in my life I felt a real, tangible sense of control and independence from the suffocating, judgmental grip of my family. It was also in that incredibly stressful environment where I met Maya. Maya was in the pre-law program, a brilliant, fast-talking whirlwind of energy, sharp intelligence, and fierce, unyielding loyalty. We met in a brutally difficult advanced calculus class that we both desperately needed for our respective degrees. While I inherently understood the complex numbers and algorithms, she understood people, motivations, and power dynamics. She was the very first person in my entire life who saw my quiet, reserved nature not as a tragic character flaw, but as a sign of intense, dangerous focus. She saw the massive ambition I kept carefully hidden behind my stoic exterior. We quickly became inseparable, fiercely fueling each other's massive dreams over cheap diner coffee and stale, day-old donuts in the 2-4-hour student lounge. I would frantically sketch out complex software algorithms on cheap paper napkins, my hands moving excitedly as I explained a revolutionary new enterprise software idea I was developing. And Maya would listen. She would really, truly listen, asking sharp, piercing legal and business questions that forced me to think bigger, to protect my intellectual property, and to strategize. "You're going to build a massive empire one day, Mark?" she told me one rainy night, her voice vibrating with a deep conviction I had never, ever heard from my own parents. "Don't you ever let those toxic people back home make you feel small for it." Maya became my true family, the family I actively chose. She was the person I desperately called when a freelance coding gig fell through and I couldn't make rent. She was the one who brought me hot takeout food when I was too broke and too exhausted to cook for myself. She was my fiercest cheerleader, my closest confidant, and the fiercely protective keeper of the massive dreams I was too terrified to say out loud to anyone else. Her unwavering belief in my potential was a critical lifeline, a stark, beautiful contrast to the dismissive validation I no longer sought from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Update 1. The immediate fallout from that disastrous Thanksgiving dinner was surreal. I drove back to my quiet, minimalist apartment feeling completely hollow. I thought dropping the $35 million truth bomb would bring me a sense of triumphant vindication, but I just felt exhausted. I had essentially won a massive war that no one else even knew I was fighting, only to find myself standing entirely alone on a scorched battlefield. The very next morning, the highly coordinated family manipulation campaign officially began. It was an absolute masterclass in psychological warfare. My phone violently buzzed on my nightstand. It was a lengthy text from my mother. "Your brother is deeply, profoundly hurt by your cruel outburst last night. He has always looked up to you, and you intentionally embarrassed him in front of our entire family just to stroke your own ego. You need to be the bigger person, apologize immediately, and fix this mess." I stared at the glowing screen, a harsh, bitter laugh escaping my lips. Derek had never, not for a single second, looked up to me. He had only ever looked down on me from his unearned pedestal. I completely ignored the text. An hour later, another one arrived from her. "Family is the most important thing in the world, Mark. Derek has a real, tangible opportunity to make something incredible of himself with Vanguard Estates. It is our biological duty to support him financially and emotionally." Then came the incredibly audacious text from Derek himself. His tone was a truly bizarre, nauseating cocktail of unearned arrogance and demanding entitlement, as if his pathetic temper tantrum at the dinner table had been a calculated negotiating tactic. "Hey bro, so, I guess you've actually done all right for yourself with the computer stuff. That's cool. Listen, this real estate project of mine is a guaranteed, slam dunk home run. We're blood, so I'll do you a massive favor and let you in on the ground floor. A small seed investment from you, say around $3.5 million, would be a really great way to show mom and dad that you're genuinely sorry for being such a massive jerk last night. Let me know when you can wire the funds." He wasn't politely asking for a loan, he was aggressively demanding a massive payout. He genuinely, deeply believed he was inherently entitled to a massive cut of my hard-earned success as a form of financial reparations for his slightly bruised ego. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. I didn't reply. I just turned my phone on silent and went to work. The final, pathetic assault came from my father. He actually called me the next day. His voice, completely unlike my mother's shrill demands, was soft, hesitant, and placating. It was the distinct voice of a weak man who desperately avoids conflict at all costs. "Mark, son," he began, clearing his throat nervously. "Let's all just take a deep breath here. Your mother is incredibly upset, her blood pressure is through the roof, and Derek is. Well, you know exactly how he gets. He's just very passionate about his little buildings. Why don't you just sit down and hear his pitch out? It's a very solid business plan. Maybe you could just invest a little bit of your money, just to keep the peace in the family? It would mean the absolute world to your mother. Keep the peace." That was his pathetic life's mantra. Maintain the calm, glassy surface of the water, even if the dark depths below were teeming with bloodthirsty sharks. His gentle, cowardly attempt at mediation was just a different, more insidious flavor of the exact same pressure. It was a quiet, gentle push toward the edge of a cliff. That evening, as I was sitting at my computer trying to lose myself in complex lines of code, an email notification forcefully popped up on my screen. It was a slick, highly produced promotional newsletter from a local commercial real estate company. The bold subject line instantly made the blood run completely cold in my veins. Vanguard Estates, a revolutionary new vision for Seattle living, proudly backed by tech visionary Mark Thomas. My heart started hammering violently against my ribs. I frantically clicked open the email. There, right in the dead center of a glossy, professionally designed marketing brochure, was my full name, my corporate headshot, and my personal story, completely twisted and co-opted for their financial gain. Derek wasn't just aggressively pressuring me for an investment, he was already publicly cashing checks using my hard-earned reputation. I picked up my cell phone, my fingers trembling slightly with pure, unadulterated rage, and made the single most important phone call of my entire life. "Maya, I said the second she picked up. I need my lawyer. Maya's corporate law firm was located on the absolute top floor of a gleaming downtown Seattle skyscraper. It was an intimidating world of cold glass, polished steel, and expensive abstract art that felt a million miles away from the cluttered, depressing campus library where our friendship was originally forged. I had forwarded her the Vanguard Estates promotional email while I was in my Uber. When I finally walked into her massive corner office, she already had the email projected onto a massive 70-inch monitor mounted on her wall. Her expression was a terrifying mixture of cold professional focus and intense personal fury. Backed by tech visionary Mark Thomas, Maya read aloud, her perfectly manicured finger aggressively tapping the glass screen. Mark, that is not vague marketing language. That is a definitive, legally actionable statement of material fact. Have you given this idiot brother of yours a single dollar? Have you signed a single piece of paper, an NDA, a term sheet, anything? No. Absolutely nothing, I said, frantically pacing back and forth in front of her floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the Seattle skyline. I haven't spoken a single word to him since he sent that insane, demanding text message asking for $3.5 million. Okay, Maya said, her eyes narrowing dangerously. She swiveled around in her expensive leather ergonomic chair, her fingers suddenly moving in an absolute blur across her mechanical keyboard. Let's see exactly what the state's public business registry says about Vanguard Estates LLC. In mere seconds, the official state business registration records appeared on the massive screen. My stomach violently clenched into a tight knot as I read the stark details. The LLC was officially registered 4 months ago. The primary owner and CEO was listed as Derek Thomas. And the co-founder. My breath completely hitched in my throat. The officially listed co-founder and chief financial officer was Susan Thomas. My mother. She's his literal business partner, I whispered, the words tasting like bitter poison on my tongue. I heavily sank into one of the plush leather chairs opposite her mahogany desk, burying my face in my hands. This isn't just her being a toxic parent and pressuring me to help her precious baby boy. She's actively in on the scam. Her own money and legal liability are on the line. Mark, look at me. It gets so much worse than that, Maya said, her voice dropping to a grim, serious register. She clicked a few more encrypted links, her elite legal research skills moving at terrifying, lightning speed. She had managed to find a poorly secured, cached version of a password-protected investor web portal that Derek's incredibly incompetent, cheap web developer had foolishly allowed Google's web crawlers to index. It took Maya less than 60 seconds to completely bypass the amateur login screen. Inside the portal was an absolute treasure trove of brazen deceit. There were fake brochures, wildly inflated PowerPoint presentations, and completely fabricated, detailed financial projections, and my name was plastered over absolutely everything. They had completely invented glowing, fabricated quotes from me, praising Derek's unparalleled business acumen and visionary leadership. They had officially listed me as the chairman of their board of advisors, but the absolute crown jewel of their massive fraud was a single PDF file tucked away in a subfolder labeled Executed Financial Agreements. The file name was simply M. Thomas, Commitment, Letter, PDF. Maya clicked it open. It was a highly formal, legally binding letter printed on a surprisingly passable forgery of my own software company's official corporate letterhead, a high-resolution logo they had clearly, illegally scraped from my public website. The letter explicitly stated my firm, legally binding intention to make a massive seed investment of $3.5 million into the Vanguard Estates project. And right there at the bottom of the page, above my typed name, there was a signature, my signature, or, at least, a clumsy but incredibly practiced forgery of it. Mark, this is federal wire fraud, Maya said, her voice incredibly sharp and crystal clear, aggressively cutting through my paralyzing shock. They are actively using your name, your corporate likeness, and highly forged legal documents to solicit millions of dollars in investments from accredited, high-net-worth investors across state lines. This isn't a petty family squabble over Thanksgiving dinner anymore. This is a massive federal crime with serious prison time attached to it. I leaned forward, staring intensely at the forged signature on the screen. It was slightly shaky in a few places, clearly trying a bit too hard to mimic the exact, messy way I hastily signed my name on receipts, but there was something deeply, hauntingly familiar about the precise ink strokes. There was something in the elegant, sweeping loop of the M, and the sharp, confident, aggressive downward angle of the K. It instantly reminded me of my father's distinct handwriting. My father possessed a perfect, neat, classical cursive style that he had practiced for years. It was the exact same handwriting he used on the handful of cheap birthday cards he had awkwardly given me over the decades. I immediately tried to push the horrifying thought away. No. It's impossible, I thought. He is way too passive. No. He is a weak, cowardly man, but he isn't a criminal mastermind. He wouldn't actively participate in something this evil. Maya was already on her desk phone, speaking in clipped, highly professional tones to a ruthless private investigator she kept on a lucrative retainer for corporate espionage cases. "Frank, it's Maya. I need an absolute rush job. Top priority. I need a full, deep dive background and comprehensive asset check on a Derek Thomas and a Susan Thomas, and their fraudulent shell company, Vanguard Estates. I want to know every single potential investor they've emailed, every single dollar they've raised or borrowed, their bank statements, everything. And I need it on my desk yesterday." As I sat there, completely paralyzed, watching my best friend, my chosen family, spring into aggressive action to protect my life's work, another horrifying realization dawned on me. The LLC was officially registered times 4 months ago. They had been actively planning this massive fraud, using my name behind my back, long before that disastrous Thanksgiving dinner. The dinner wasn't the start of their scheme. It was just their desperate, final, pathetic attempt to bully me into making their massive lie a reality after they had already committed the federal fraud. The next 48 hours were a relentless, suffocating deluge of ugly, irrefutable truths delivered in concise, brutal, heavily documented reports from Frank, the private investigator. The very first revelation was about the actual source of my mother's initial capital investment into Vanguard Estates. She hadn't just used her personal checking account. She had completely cashed out a massive, highly penalized portion of her and my father's joint retirement portfolio, the very same, meager nest egg they had always loudly claimed was too small to help pay for my college education. She had poured hundreds of thousands of dollars directly into Derek's doomed shell company. This wasn't just a mother's blind support, it was a desperate, all-in, catastrophic gamble. Her frantic, hysterical pressure on me at dinner wasn't just about helping Derek succeed, it was about desperately saving herself from total, impending financial ruin. Frank's deep dive investigation also quickly identified their primary financial target, a notoriously ruthless man named Mr. Sterling, a semi-retired commercial real estate mogul with a legendary, cutthroat reputation in the Pacific Northwest. He was old school, incredibly cautious, and known for being notoriously difficult to impress. According to Frank's highly placed source inside Sterling's private equity firm, the Times-only Times reason Mr. Sterling was even remotely considering Derek's amateur, poorly planned project was because of my supposed, heavily documented financial involvement. They were actively using my hard-earned, pristine reputation in the tech world as the shiny bait to land a massive whale. But the most gut-wrenching, soul-crushing discovery was yet to come. Maya called me extremely late the next night. Her voice was incredibly tight with a cold, terrifying fury I had never once heard from her before. "You need to get to my office right now, Mark?" she demanded. "It's about your old business mentor. It's about Greg." I drove recklessly through the deserted, rain-slicked Seattle streets, my mind racing in 1,000 directions. Greg, the man who had been my very first real mentor in the tech industry. The older man who had patiently helped me refine my initial business plan, who had helped me navigate the treacherous waters of landing my first angel investors. It didn't make any logical sense. When I burst into Maya's office, she had a physical printout of a decrypted email exchange sitting dead in the center of her large mahogany desk. It was an exchange between Greg's highly secure professional corporate email account and Derek's personal Gmail account, dated a full 2 months before Thanksgiving. Derek had written, "Greg, per our phone conversation earlier today, I need the absolute inside track. What is my brother's software company actually worth behind closed doors? Don't give me the PR bullshit public numbers. I need to know his exact personal equity percentage, his current liquidity, his upcoming expansion plans, and his vulnerabilities. I need the real story so I can leverage him." Greg's reply was a complete, total, devastating betrayal spelled out in undeniable black and white ink. He had blatantly violated his NDA and sent Derek a highly detailed, deeply confidential executive summary of my company's internal finances, our secret growth projections, and my exact personal equity stake. He had even offered his own amateur, psychological opinion on my mental state. Mark is incredibly hungry for family approval, especially from his mother. He hides it well, but it's his blind spot. If you frame the investment correctly, make him feel like he's saving the family, you can absolutely manipulate him into investing millions. Greg had completely sold me out. The man I had deeply trusted, the father figure I had desperately projected onto him because my own father was a ghost, had coldly analyzed my deepest emotional weaknesses and sold them to my sociopathic brother. And for what? Frank later confirmed via bank records that Greg was promised a massive 10% finder's fee commission on any investment capital Derek could secure using the stolen, confidential information. How could he do this? I whispered, the words feeling like dry ash in my mouth. I vividly remembered all the late nights I had confided in Greg over drinks, sharing my deep business fears and my painful family frustrations. He had sat there, listening with a warm, sympathetic smile, all while secretly taking mental notes to sell my trauma to the highest bidder. Massive amounts of money make people do incredibly ugly, evil things, Mark, Maya said softly, walking around her desk to place a comforting hand on my shaking shoulder. And toxic family dynamics make them do even uglier ones. As I stood there staring blankly at the printed emails, the horrifying image of that forged signature on the commitment letter violently flashed in my mind again. The familiar, elegant loop of the M. The steady, perfectly practiced, confident hand. Maya must have seen the dawning, paralyzing horror wash over my pale face. "What is it?" she asked, her voice gentle but probing. "The signature," I said, my own voice barely a hoarse whisper. "The forgery on the $3.5 million investment letter. I need to see it again on the big screen." Maya quickly pulled the fraudulent PDF document back up on the massive monitor. I stared at it, my heart pounding a slow, incredibly heavy, painful drumbeat in my chest. I thought about my father's perfect, neat cursive. A skill he was quietly, intensely proud of. I thought about his obsessive calligraphy hobby, the expensive, imported fountain pens and imported inks he kept meticulously locked away in his oak desk drawer. The way he could flawlessly, effortlessly replicate different historical fonts just by looking at them. His constant, suffocating silence. His silence wasn't weakness. It wasn't him trying to keep the peace. It was the quiet, terrifying composure of a man hiding a massive, criminal secret. "Maya," I said, the horrific realization landing with the devastating force of a physical blow, a punch to the gut that violently knocked all the oxygen out of my lungs. "I know who forged the document. I think my father forged my signature." Update 2. There was absolutely no going back from this. The Rubicon had been crossed. This had to end immediately. And it had to end in a highly calculated way that left absolutely no room for ambiguity, no possibility for them to gaslight me or twist the narrative later. With Maya's expert, ruthless legal guidance, we meticulously planned the confrontation. We didn't plan it as a messy, emotional family argument. We planned it as a precise, surgical, devastating legal strike. There would be no shouting, no crying, no hysterics. Just cold, hard, undeniable, legally binding facts. Maya drafted and sent a highly formal, incredibly aggressive email to my parents and Derek. It was an absolute masterpiece of terrifying corporate legalese. It formally requested an urgent, mandatory teleconference meeting to immediately discuss a severe legal matter of potential federal wire fraud, identity theft, and fraudulent financial misrepresentation concerning Vanguard Estates LLC. She strategically CC'd Mr. Sterling's executive assistant on the email, explicitly noting that his client's potential multi-million-dollar investment was directly, legally implicated in the fraud. That, exactly as Maya had predicted, lit a massive, terrifying fire under all of them. They frantically agreed to a secure video conference for the following afternoon. I sat rigidly in Maya's state-of-the-art, glass-walled conference room. The massive 100-inch screen in front of me was split into 4 equal quadrants. In the top left quadrant, Maya and I sat side by side at a long, polished marble table, a neat, intimidating stack of heavily redacted documents placed deliberately in front of us. In the top right quadrant, my parents, Susan and Thomas, sat stiffly on the familiar, ugly floral couch in their Seattle living room. Susan looked incredibly indignant, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, ready for a fight. Thomas just looked pale, sweaty, and absolutely terrified, like a condemned man taking his final walk to the execution chamber. In the bottom left quadrant, Derek was sitting in a flashy, clearly rented, temporary office space, a ridiculously large, fake ficus plant positioned behind him to make him look important. He was desperately trying to project an image of a powerful, unbothered CEO, but the sheer, unadulterated panic in his wide eyes completely betrayed him. A long, tense moment later, the fourth and final window blinked to life. Mr. Sterling appeared. He was a stern-looking, deeply intimidating man in his late 60s with piercing, ice-cold blue eyes and a face that looked like it had been violently carved from solid granite. He gave a single, curt nod to the camera. "Thank you all for joining on such short notice," Maya began, her voice the absolute epitome of cold, terrifying authority. "We are here today to formally discuss the repeated, illegal, and completely unauthorized use of my client, Mark Thomas's name, likeness, and corporate branding in the marketing and aggressive fundraising materials for Vanguard Estates LLC." Derek instantly scoffed, a highly nervous, high-pitched, pathetic sound. "Oh, come on, Mark. Is that what this whole dramatic circus is about? Are you seriously doing this? I was just trying to give the family business a little bit of tech credibility. It's just called aggressive marketing, bro. Don't be a baby." "Marketing, Mr. Thomas?" Maya countered, her gaze sharp enough to effortlessly cut through solid steel. "Let's be significantly more specific for the record. I have here a promotional email sent to over 300 potential, accredited investors, a mailing list which notably includes Mr. Sterling. This email explicitly, legally claims that Mark Thomas is providing massive strategic and financial backing to your company. Is that a verifiably true statement?" It's just a common turn of phrase, my mother, Susan, immediately interjected, completely unable to stay silent and let her golden boy burn. You aggressive corporate lawyers are always deliberately twisting people's words to make money. Mark is his biological brother. Of course, he supports Derek in spirit. This is a family matter, not a legal one. Support in spirit does not typically involve a highly forged, legally binding financial document, Mrs. Thomas, Maya said, her voice dropping a full degree colder, freezing the room. With a swift, practiced click of her mouse, Maya shared her screen with the entire call. The fraudulent $3.5 million partnership commitment letter suddenly appeared in all four quadrants, completely filling the screen. This legal document, which falsely purports to be from Mark's tech company, legally pledges a $3.5 million seed investment into Vanguard Estates. It is a complete, 100% fabrication. The corporate letterhead was illegally stolen from my client's public website, and the signature at the bottom is a blatant, highly illegal forgery. Derek's face instantly went chalk white, the blood completely drained from his cheeks. He started to violently stammer, his carefully constructed, arrogant composure completely crumbling in real time in front of his biggest potential investor. I don't know where that document came from. That must have been a massive administrative mistake. Someone on my marketing team must have, just gotten a little bit ahead of themselves. Mr. Sterling, who had been silently watching this pathetic exchange with the terrifying, detached intensity of an apex predator, finally spoke. His voice was a low, incredibly powerful rumble that seemed to physically vibrate through the expensive conference room speakers. A mistake, son? Sterling asked, his eyes locked onto Derek. That specific document was the sole, primary basis upon which my private equity firm agreed to engage in financial due diligence with you. My consideration of this entire amateur project was entirely, 100% contingent upon Mark Thomas's verified financial involvement. This is absolutely not a mistake. This is a material, criminal misrepresentation of financial fact. It's not just a misrepresentation, Mr. Sterling. It is federal wire fraud, I said, speaking for the very first time on the call. My voice was incredibly steady, betraying absolutely none of the violent emotional turmoil churning violently inside my gut. I looked directly into the camera, staring right at my mother's image on the screen. And it wasn't just Derek acting alone. My mother, Susan Thomas, acting as the official co-founder and a primary financial backer of this fraudulent LLC, was fully, legally aware that they were illegally using my name to solicit millions in funds. Susan loudly gasped, dramatically placing a hand over her chest in a highly theatrical, sickeningly fake gesture of shock and deep betrayal. How dare you? I was only ever trying to help my son succeed. You are a cruel, selfish, incredibly ungrateful boy, Mark, after everything we've done for you. Her pathetic performance was completely for nothing. The undeniable, legally binding evidence was sitting right there on the screen for everyone to see. But I wasn't quite done yet. The real architect of the absolute most damaging part of the massive fraud was still pathetically hiding in plain sight, wrapped in his usual, cowardly cloak of silence. I slowly turned my attention to my father. He was visibly shrinking back into the ugly floral couch cushions, his terrified eyes darting wildly everywhere but at the camera lens. There is one final, crucial piece to this incredibly ugly puzzle, I said, my heart hammering furiously against my ribs. The physical forgery itself. It was a very good attempt. Incredibly convincing at first glance. But unfortunately for you, not quite good enough. The virtual air in the conference call was thick with a highly toxic, suffocating silence. Derek and my mother were still frantically sputtering weak denials, but their pathetic arguments were completely hollow, rapidly collapsing under the immense, crushing weight of the irrefutable evidence Maya and I had methodically laid out. Mr. Sterling simply watched them with the cold, highly detached curiosity of a scientist observing dying microbes in a petri dish. As I was saying, I continued, my voice calm, cold, and meticulously measured as I forcefully drew the focus back to me. The forgery is the absolute key to this crime. Because a high-level forgery like this isn't a simple administrative mistake, it is a highly deliberate, calculated, criminal act. It requires immense intent. It requires a very steady hand. I paused, letting the heavy silence stretch out agonizingly, forcing them to deeply contemplate the terrifying implication of my words. I looked directly at my father's pathetic image on the screen, pinning him to the couch with my unyielding gaze. And it requires a certain, specific artistic skill. A deep, intimate familiarity with the exact signature being illegally copied. On my subtle cue, Maya clicked her mouse one more time. The massive screen instantly changed. She now displayed a highly detailed, side-by-side graphical comparison that Frank's forensic team had expertly prepared. On the absolute left side of the screen was a massively blown-up, high-resolution scan of the forged signature from the fraudulent $3.5 million investment letter. On the right side was an equally massive, crystal clear scan of the signature from the cheap grocery store birthday card my father had awkwardly given me when I turned 21. It was the absolute last birthday he had ever given me a card with more than just his hastily scribbled name at the bottom. The old card read, "Mark, so proud of the man you're becoming. Love, Dad." The two signatures on the screen were completely, undeniably identical. Not just vaguely similar, identical. The highly distinctive, elegant, sweeping loop of the M in Mark. The sharp, aggressive downward stroke of the K. The exact way the D in Dad was perfectly formed with a slight, artistic flourish that was my father's unique, undeniable calligraphy trademark. It was as clear, as precise, and as utterly damning as a bloody fingerprint left at a murder scene. A small, truly strangled sound violently escaped my mother's lips. "Oh my God," she whispered, her face going completely slack with a genuine, unfeigned, horrifying shock. She slowly, mechanically, turned her head to look in absolute horror at the man sitting frozen beside her, the man she had been legally married to for over 35 years. For the very first time in my life, she seemed to be looking at him not as her silent, highly compliant, easily manipulated husband, but as a complete, terrifying stranger. Thomas sat completely frozen for a long, agonizing, excruciating moment. The blank, cowardly mask he had worn his entire miserable life finally cracked, then completely shattered into a million irreparable pieces. His face violently crumpled. His shoulders, which he always held so rigidly straight and proud to project false authority, instantly slumped in utter, pathetic defeat. In a single, horrifying instant, he seemed to have physically aged 20 years. He looked incredibly old, incredibly small, and profoundly, disgustingly pathetic. He started, his voice a broken, raspy whisper that was barely audible through the microphone. He nervously cleared his dry throat. "Derek." Derek came to me crying. He begged me. His terrified eyes flickered up, not looking at me, but staring desperately at the camera lens as if he were pleading for mercy with a panel of invisible, highly judgmental gods. He said he just needed a little bit of help to get Mr. Sterling officially on board. Just a tiny push to get his foot in the door with the big leagues. He swore to me. He swore Mark would never, ever find out. His eyes finally, agonizingly darted over to my specific window on the screen, and for the very first time in my 34 years of life, they were filled with something other than blank, suffocating indifference. They were completely filled with a desperate, pathetic, pleading shame. "He said you were doing so incredibly well, Mark. You had so much money, you wouldn't even miss it if things went wrong. I didn't think you'd ever actually find out. I just wanted to help your brother succeed." His full, uncoerced confession landed heavily in the room with the devastating force of a physical blow. It was, in so many ways, a betrayal far deeper, far more insidious than Derek's greedy, sociopathic scheming, or my mother's blatant narcissistic manipulation. This was a massive betrayal from the one person whose quiet approval I had, on some deep, secret, pathetic subconscious level, always desperately craved. His lifelong, suffocating silence hadn't been neutrality. It had been the quiet, highly patient work of a willing co-conspirator. He hadn't just passively allowed the massive injustice in our toxic family to happen. He had actively, skillfully, and criminally participated in it the moment the financial stakes were high enough. He hadn't just failed to protect me as a father should. He had actively helped load the gun, carefully aimed it at my head, and then stood by silently as his golden son eagerly pulled the trigger. The final, most devastating piece of the psychological puzzle violently clicked into place in my mind. He hadn't just been blindly guessing that I wouldn't miss the $3.5 million. He fundamentally, deeply hadn't believed my success was actually real. Even after I had boldly dropped the $35 million valuation at the Thanksgiving table, he was so deeply conditioned to view me as the lesser, failed son that he automatically assumed my success was a massive exaggeration, a total fluke. In his twisted mind, I was still just the quiet, annoying boy with a nerdy computer hobby, and actively stealing from me to fund the golden child was a completely victimless crime. "Mr. Sterling's booming voice violently shattered the silence, shaking them all from their terrified stupor. "This meeting is officially over. Consider my firm's interest in Vanguard Estates LLC completely, officially, and permanently withdrawn. My elite legal team will be in touch with all of you by the end of the day regarding the highly serious matter of fraudulent misrepresentation and attempted financial fraud." His video window instantly went black. Derek violently buried his face in his shaking hands, his shoulders heaving as he began to openly sob. My mother was just staring blankly at my father, her mouth opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish pulled from the water, but absolutely no sound was coming out. The toxic family unit hadn't just been slightly cracked. It had been completely, irreversibly atomized, and I was the one who had finally, gleefully been forced to push the big red button. "Maya will be sending over the final cease and desist paperwork," I said coldly, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "Do not ever contact me again. If you do, I will hand all of this evidence over to the FBI. I clicked end meeting. The fallout was immediate, brutal, and absolutely catastrophic for them. Mr. Sterling was a ruthless man of his word. His massive corporate lawyers sent a cease and desist letter so aggressively worded it practically smoked when they opened it. While he ultimately didn't file a highly public lawsuit, Maya strongly suspected he simply didn't want the embarrassing public relations nightmare of admitting he was almost completely duped by a smooth-talking amateur. Like Derek, he did something far more damaging. He made a few quiet, highly influential phone calls. In the small, incredibly insular, cutthroat world of Pacific Northwest commercial real estate, a quiet, negative word from a titan like Sterling carries significantly more weight than a dozen federal lawsuits. Within a single week, Derek was an absolute pariah. The highly embarrassing story of the Vanguard Estates fraud, as it quickly became known in elite circles, spread like a massive wildfire through the city's financial sector. Every single other potential investor who had been cautiously waiting to see what Sterling would do immediately pulled their funding. Vanguard Estates violently imploded. It was a pathetic house of cards collapsing in a Category 5 hurricane. The bank, alerted to the highly fraudulent activity by Sterling's aggressive firm, completely froze Derek's corporate accounts pending a full, devastating internal investigation. The massive amount of money my mother had recklessly gambled from their retirement fund was completely gone. It was hopelessly entangled in a massive legal mess that would take years and tens of thousands of dollars in high-priced legal fees to even begin to untangle. Her desperate, all-in, catastrophic bet on the golden child had resulted in their total, inescapable financial ruin. As Maya had cynically predicted, Derek's superficial, gold-digging girlfriend, the one who was so incredibly impressed by his exclusive CEO lifestyle, vanished from his life as quickly as his platinum credit line. Then came the pathetic, desperate phone calls to me. They were a highly predictable, incredibly pathetic progression of the 5 stages of grief mixed with toxic manipulation. Derek was first. He left a long string of deranged voicemails that swung wildly between 2 extreme poles. The first would be a rage-filled, screaming rant: "You ruined my entire life, Mark. You completely destroyed me. I hope you rot in hell, you jealous, pathetic bastard." The next voicemail, left just an hour later, would be a tearful, pathetic, pleading message: "Mark, please pick up. You have to help me. You have to call Mr. Sterling and fix this mess. Tell him it was just a misunderstanding. I'm begging you. Bro, we're blood." Then came my mother. Her very first call was pure, undiluted, screeching venom. She screamed into the phone for 3 straight minutes about how I had single-handedly destroyed the family, how I was a cold-blooded monster, how she deeply wished she had never given birth to me. I calmly hung up and blocked the number. When I didn't respond to her subsequent calls from different numbers, her tone drastically shifted. She started leaving these sickeningly syrupy, highly manipulative voicemails. Her voice quivering with incredibly false sorrow. "Mark, darling, it's your mother. I know we made a tiny mistake. I see that now, but we are family, and families always forgive each other. We can get through this tough time together. Please, just wire us a little bit of money to cover the legal fees. Your father is a complete, suicidal mess." And then came my father. He only left one single message. It was short. His voice was incredibly heavy, completely hollow, and utterly defeated. "Mark, I know I should have done more. I know I was weak. I'm truly, deeply sorry." It was the absolute closest he had ever come to taking actual responsibility for anything in his entire miserable life. He was sorry. Sorry for a lifetime of severe neglect. Sorry for his criminal complicity. Or maybe, he was just incredibly sorry that he finally got caught. It didn't matter anymore. A pathetic apology doesn't rebuild a house after you've actively helped burn it to the ground. I listened to all their pathetic messages, one after the other, sitting in the quiet, peaceful sanctuary of my apartment. I didn't feel the burning rage I expected. I didn't feel the triumphant, gloating satisfaction I thought I might. I just felt a deep, profound, beautiful sense of total release. It felt exactly as if a massive, heavy, invisible iron chain that had been wrapped tightly around my chest for 34 years had finally, permanently been shattered. The desperate, childish, pathetic need for their approval had finally, blessedly died. I took a deep breath and did something I should have done a full decade ago. I opened my phone's contacts list. I found Derek's name. I tapped block contact. I did the exact same for my mother. And then, with a final, incredibly liberating tap of my thumb, I blocked my father's number. The next day, I met with Maya to discuss our final legal steps. We had them dead to rights. We could easily press federal charges for wire fraud and felony forgery. We could file a massive civil suit for damages to my corporate reputation that would completely bankrupt them for the rest of their miserable lives. A small part of me, the deeply wounded child inside, wanted to do it. It desperately wanted to see them face real, highly public, devastating consequences. It wanted to see them sitting in a cold courtroom, completely stripped of their false pride and their pathetic lies. The massive lawsuit would almost certainly trigger a highly messy, highly public divorce, forcing my parents to violently turn on each other under the immense legal pressure. It would be a highly fitting, poetic end to their highly toxic partnership. But as I sat there in Maya's office, looking out over the city, a powerful, overwhelming clarity washed over me. Dragging them relentlessly through the court system would forcefully keep me chained to them for months, maybe even years. It would mean endless depositions, stressful hearings, and constant, draining legal maneuvering. It would mean significantly more drama, more stress, and more of my precious life force being completely consumed by their bottomless pit of dysfunction. The absolute best revenge wasn't seeing them locked in a federal prison cell. The best revenge was completely forgetting they even existed. My victory wasn't about their severe punishment. It was entirely about my peace. We are not pressing charges, I told Maya, my voice incredibly firm and resolute. We are not filing a civil suit. We are completely done. I am walking away from all of it. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, I heard her warmly smile through the phone. Good? She said, her voice rich with deep approval and relief. I was really hoping you'd say that. Now you can finally start living your own life for yourself. Ass. The 6 months that followed were the quietest, most incredibly peaceful months of my entire adult life. The very first thing I did was put my Seattle apartment on the market. The city simply held way too many ghosts, way too many painful memories of feeling small, insignificant, and unloved. I desperately needed a totally clean break, a completely new horizon. I promoted a brilliant, highly capable young executive to run the Seattle office, and I permanently moved my company's main headquarters and myself to Portland, Oregon. The energy in Portland was an absolute revelation. It was a vibrant city full of creators, innovators, and people who were significantly more interested in what you were actively building than who your toxic family was. Surrounded by the towering, steadfast presence of Mount Hood and the sprawling, endless pine forests, my old, pathetic family problems began to feel incredibly trivial, like a silly schoolyard squabble viewed from a great, vast distance. Freed from the constant, suffocating, low-grade hum of anxiety my family had always generated in me, my mind felt incredibly clear, immensely sharp, and more wildly creative than ever before. The business didn't just grow, it absolutely exploded. We successfully landed a massive, company-defining contract with a huge national tech conglomerate. It was a massive deal that literally tripled our total valuation overnight. The rapid promotion from a scrappy, underdog startup to a major, highly respected player in the industry was dizzying, but in the absolute best possible way. It felt earned. It felt incredibly real. I bought a stunning, modern condo in the heart of the city with massive floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic, breathtaking view of the mountains. The very first piece of furniture I bought was a huge, incredibly comfortable sectional couch, big enough for all my real friends. Maya, who had officially become my chief corporate counsel and remained my absolute best friend, would frequently drive down from Seattle, and we'd sit on my balcony for hours, drinking expensive craft beer and talking about everything and nothing. I was actively building a life, not just a company, a life that was whole, balanced, and entirely on my own terms. Then, one sunny Tuesday afternoon, a highly official, certified legal letter arrived at my office. It was from a sleazy, low-rent law firm in a small, depressing town just outside of Seattle that I'd never even heard of. My first panic thought was that it was some lingering fallout from the Vanguard Estates mess, but my hands were completely steady as I slid a metal letter opener under the flap. My heart no longer leaped into my throat at the mere thought of my family. I was completely detached, clinical, like a highly trained doctor examining a bizarre medical case study. Inside the envelope was a thick document, heavy with dense, ridiculous legal jargon, officially informing me that a massive civil lawsuit had been filed against me. The plaintiff? Susan Thomas. My own mother. I quickly scanned the pages, my eyes skipping over the bloated legalese until I found the absolute core of her insane claim. It was so incredibly audacious, so breathtakingly, pathologically delusional that I actually threw my head back and laughed out loud in my empty office. Susan was officially suing me for a massive 20% of my company's total profits. Her legal argument, as completely bizarre and unhinged as it was exactly this: her years of severe emotional neglect, her constant, brutal criticism, and her blatant, unapologetic favoritism towards my brother had actively created a highly hostile and challenging developmental environment. This incredibly toxic environment, the lawsuit boldly claimed, was the primary motivating factor for my immense financial success. She literally argued that, in essence, she had given me the ultimate gift of extreme adversity. Her terrible, abusive parenting, her sleazy lawyer argued, was the exact crucible that had forged my ambition and my drive to succeed. Therefore, because her abuse made me rich, she was legally entitled to a significant 20% share of the massive financial rewards. She was aggressively demanding what her lawyer had the absolute gall to legally term a parental inheritance paid in reverse for services rendered as a negative role model. It was, without a doubt, the most narcissistic, pathologically twisted piece of logic I had ever encountered in my entire life. She wasn't sorry. She hadn't learned a single, solitary thing from the destruction of her life. In her deeply sick mind, even my massive success, the incredible success I had achieved entirely times in spite times of her, was somehow, magically, because times of her. She would twist absolute reality into any bizarre shape necessary to forcefully make herself the hero, or at least the primary catalyst, of my story. This insane lawsuit was the final, definitive proof I needed that my difficult decision to cut them completely out of my life wasn't a rash, angry overreaction. It was a highly necessary, life-saving act of emotional and spiritual survival. Some people, I realized with chilling, absolute clarity, are simply human black holes. They will violently suck all the light, joy, and energy out of your universe and give absolutely nothing but cold darkness in return. You cannot fix them. You cannot change them. You can only get as far away from their gravitational pull as you possibly can. I immediately faxed a copy of the ridiculous letter to Maya. She called me back less than 10 minutes later, literally sputtering with uncontrollable laughter. "Oh my God, Mark," she gasped once she had finally caught her breath. This is an absolute masterpiece of sheer, unadulterated delusion. It's the Mona Lisa of frivolous lawsuits. So I don't have to worry about this actually going to trial?" I asked, grinning. "Worry?" She laughed again, a loud, barking sound. "Absolutely not. I am going to have this completely thrown out of court so incredibly fast it will literally make your mother's head violently spin. I will file for a summary dismissal with prejudice tomorrow morning. Don't give it another thought." Maya was completely as good as her word. The insane lawsuit was summarily, brutally dismissed by a highly unamused judge who, according to Maya, openly called it an astonishing, offensive abuse of the legal process and a complete insult to basic common sense. My mother was officially ordered by the court to pay all of my massive legal fees for having to respond to such a completely baseless, harassing claim. It was the absolute last time I ever heard from any of them. The silence that immediately followed was final, complete, and incredibly beautiful. It was no longer the tense, painful, suffocating silence of my childhood, filled with unspoken resentments and fear. It was a peaceful, wide-open silence full of endless promise. It's been a few years since that last, highly absurd chapter. My company is doing significantly better than I ever could have possibly imagined. I met a wonderful woman named Emily, a brilliant and hilarious landscape architect who knew absolutely nothing about my toxic past and didn't care at all about my massive net worth. She just liked that I made her laugh and that I was always willing to try her weird vegetarian recipes. We are married now, and we are currently expecting our very first child. The real, true success of my life isn't measured in millions of dollars, massive corporate valuations, or lucrative stock options. It's measured in the quiet, completely ordinary moments. It's measured in the easy, genuine laughter I share with my beautiful wife, the genuine, earned respect I get from my hardworking colleagues, and the simple, profound, incredible joy of waking up every single morning without a heavy knot of dread in my stomach. I learned an incredibly hard, painful lesson from the people who were supposed to teach me about unconditional love. I learned that sometimes, the people who share your exact blood are the ones who are most willing to violently drain it from you. Family, I've completely discovered, isn't about biology at all. It's about fierce loyalty. It's about the people who show up for you consistently and without a hidden agenda. The people who genuinely celebrate your wins as if they were their very own. Who lift you up when you inevitably fall, and who see and love you for who you truly are, not for who they desperately want to exploit you to be. It's about the family you actively build, not the one you were unluckily born into. Cutting my toxic biological family out of my life was the absolute hardest and most completely necessary decision I ever made. It hurt in a way that's incredibly hard to describe, like slowly amputating a limb that has become deeply gangrenous. The phantom pains still ache sometimes late at night, but it was exactly like removing a deadly poison that had been slowly killing me my entire life. It allowed me to finally heal, to finally breathe deeply, and to finally become the person I was always meant to be. My life isn't a perfect fairy tale, but it is entirely mine, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.